Thank you. Thank you very much. That was all really interesting stuff from all four of you guys. I'm interested about the Consul platform. I guess I was wondering how open you think other governments after municipalities might be to using it. I've worked for the government of Canada, and I think the idea of having some other platform have access or ownership over kind of the data and the input. I was just wondering how that would work. And then for the panelists at the end, also very interesting stuff. But I was wondering how it might work for maybe smaller issues that aren't kind of as big as Brexit, as big as the Trump election.
Yeah. So, respected with the Consul project, this is an open source project, as I mentioned, that can be used by any government. Just take it and use it. Most of the current users of the project are at the city level. In some cases, are huge cities like New York or Madrid. So depends also on the level. But there are some regional and national governments using the platform. There are, I think, like 5 regional governments and 2 national governments. And basically, it doesn't change much what you do actually, because once you are talking with millions of citizens in a city, the level of complexity is basically like if you're talking with everybody in a country. It doesn't. You are already in like the high level complexity, let's say. So basically, the kind of use to get ideas, debates, comment text, and so on is quite similar. The big thing that changed is that national government usually have much more power, and the most difficult, the biggest barrier for using the platform is that it needs politicians who are brave enough to spread that power and to let the people take those decisions instead of me or instead of us. And that usually happens more likely at the local level, because the kind of decisions, well, they are less afraid. But it's a clear trend on it's a more and more government using not only but similar platforms. And I think the most interesting case is at the national level, of course. So we hope that more than these 2 national governments will join soon. So, yeah.
Right. So I guess you asked about this, whether this, the approach we developed can be applied in some small issue, right, rather than this like bigger kind of things. So we actually had work to focus on the topic extraction from micro blog conversations. So it's just like some on Twitter, right? You have like a reply to kind of relation or mention relation. So we have a small sort of like conversation tree. And then we also have some work on that, and then be able to actually like extract the specific topic people discuss there. And in fact, like what's more interesting here is we have a model actually try to separate 2 different kind of latent factors. So the factor relating to the topics people discuss in social media, and the other latent factor actually relating to how people frame their message. So, some people may sort of like, query something, or some people just express agreement with the previous author, writer, and then some other users actually like, could have a more stronger, like, sort of like expression of their opinion. So it's just like a different way people like express their message. Now, in fact, like using this kind of information, we actually will be able to do this so-called fake news detection. So I know it sounds like a quite, sort of like, this kind of like issue sounds like unrelated to each other. But in fact, like in fake news detection, sometimes like, you could look into how the users respond to the original, this tweet. So maybe like there's a sort of like a mixed kind of a user stance towards this particular original tweet, and that will indicate whether the original kind of tweet is rumor, or not.
Thank you very much for all the presentation. My question is about the design of the citizen science or any crowdsourcing project that you mentioned, which is based on individual democracy. Basically, everybody has got one vote, which is equal to others. I'm not questioning the basis of individual democracy, but there is other sort of governance, like representative democracy. And I couldn't find a lot of area that I could see the design based on representative democracy, not only because there are some influencer on Twitter that might be very different from every single individual, but also people may not be very well represented if we don't have a good representative of their group. So minority might be ignored. And if we don't actually mandate to have at least one person from, I don't know, a minority group, then we don't hear their voice at all. So could you reflect on that?
Yeah, so just comment about this difference. In the cases of direct democracy or direct participation, usually it's not cases to substitute representation. In the places in the world where they have the largest amount of direct voting, decision, and so on, I think there is some place in the United States where it's really the largest case. The decisions that are taken directly by the people is like the 0.006% of all the decisions. It's just that these small decisions usually are really important. So it's just a complement to a representative democracy. It's not changing it. It just complements it, but in a really powerful way. And about this idea of minorities and these problems, actually, even when for the first thought one could thought the opposite, like the representative democracy is representing the people better and direct democracy may not. Actually, the real data that we have from real governments says usually that it is the opposite. So representative governments tend really easily to produce very harmful decisions against minorities without any kind of control. So, and this large history basically from all over the world of governments who have no control from the people and they take horrible decisions against minorities or human rights and so on. And it happens basically the opposite with direct democracy. So if you study, for example, the last 100 years of Switzerland, all the decisions that they have taken, but also in Germany or in the United States, and you check what was the impact on human rights or minorities, you see in all cases from the last 100 years until now, a clear trend protecting the minorities. So it looks like even when it's a direct participation and the majority could take very bad decisions, the majority take decisions thinking also in the minorities much more than their politicians. So in that sense, it's paradoxically, but actually it protects better minorities and human rights. So in that sense, I think we can be relaxed with this kind of things.
I'm not questioning that. We can have a debate if I was disagree, but I'm not. I'm just saying, have you considered the opposite way? In your design of the project, maybe there is a way that somewhere is working or not. I'm just asking. I totally agree with the whole concept.
So I think in terms of designing these platforms and these participatory processes, I think that it's a really difficult question. Like it's a big issue in designing these processes, right? Because how do you make sure that the people who take part are not those that are anyways engaged already? How do you make sure that minorities, people who maybe their voices are not usually heard, are also included? A lot of these projects, particularly in participatory budgeting exercises, for example, combine online and offline. So it's like you can't just have a platform and say to people, okay, here's your platform, go for it. You really need to understand first how to incentivize participation, how to motivate people to participate. And secondly, how do you reach those people, for example, that are not online, like older people, for example, that equally have a say. So, so there's like a lot of these design choices that obviously need to be taken into account when you design these. But it is, and I just seconding what Miguel said, but I think you're right, it's a big issue and there's a lot of thinking around that still to be done, because definitely it's not perfect yet, but the potential is definitely there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think no, I think it's on. Where participation depends on access to the internet, there's always a danger of digital exclusion, and that's, I think, now recognised as being an important problem for some sectors of society. So I think we have to look to ways in which we can engage the whole breadth of society, and not necessarily just relying upon, say, digital systems and platforms. Another question? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the presentation. They were all very interesting. I want to ask to Miguel, it's kind of related to what you said before, but just more kind of practical thing. Do you actually get data about who is using the platform in the Decide Madrid or any? So do you know, like, well, demographic data, like, you know, age, gender, ethnicity, kind of things?
Yeah, in that case, depend on the platform and the institution using it, what they want to publish or not. There are institutions who are more open with the transparency strategies and they publish all this kind of data, and institutions not so much. But for example, we have the data of Madrid, and for each of the process, we have a profile of the people participating in terms of age, gender, and the districts they are living. So you can see also correlation depending on the income of the district or the education level and so on. And from the very first important process happening there, for example, this participatory budgeting, it's a really good result. So it's a really transverse participation. You have people from all ages with an age curve that basically mimics the age population of the city. Basically perfect balance on gender, some noise, but basically random noise between the different districts. So it looks like, again, even if it's direct participation, you get a really, really, really good representation on the people. Not, for example, like if you check, for example, the elections in Madrid, that the data is totally biased. If you check who is voting in the elections, for example, in Madrid, you see that there are much more older people, there are much more from specific districts and so on. So, for example, the people who vote in Madrid are much less representative from the people of Madrid than the people who voted in the last participatory budgeting, for example.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I have just another question for you. Sorry, I don't remember your name. How do you take into account, analyzing the tweets, doing the sentiment analysis, how do you take into account sarcastic tweet? Someone say, "Oh wow, I'm so happy Trump was elected," you know, like, and like, meaning complete the opposite of that.
I mean, in the work I presented, we didn't specifically consider this as sarcasm. I mean, this is basically like a quite challenging task. I mean, often you can't simply based on the content itself to predict the user stance. However, we would think the user usually connect with the other people like-minded, right? So it might be the case that users friends actually tend to express in a certain kind of a stance, and then even this particular user, I mean, in terms of his content, somehow indicate sort of opposite stance, but then you can still infer from this user's social network information, and then also the user's sort of a past sort of a tweeting behavior to have a more better kind of a stance prediction, because you're not just looking to this isolated sort of individual tweet in isolation. You're actually taking into the the sort of a more wider contextual information. And then so in that particular, basically if we do that, then we should be able to somehow kind of address this sarcasm problem a bit. Yeah.
Hi.
Sorry, no. It's
Yeah, hi. I also have two questions, one more general and one more technical to Yulan. So the first one is, with this emerging number of platforms and digital participatory tools, so where different problems trying to be reflected in those platforms, what are the implications of fragmentation of the problem across different tools and platforms? Is there a risk of kind of missing some parts of information, or what are the ways of collecting the whole entire landscape kind of representation across multiple platforms? One problem across multiple platforms. So what are the implications, Miguel and Eva, you think?
Multiple platforms in one place, you mean?
One problem is represented across multiple platforms. So they keep emerging, like Consul. There's also different apps.
This is still not a problem, because in general, each institution, you only have one platform. So usually there's only one space where you can participate.
Yeah.
So it's just that platform that may work better or worse, but basically everything goes there. So there is no fragmentation of in general.
So what is the process of organization at taking decision on which platform to
as any platform the
implement,
institution
yeah.
wants, I mean, governments have usually a lot of different platforms, like social media platforms, communication platforms, just the websites information, and they just have the internal process on to decide which platform works better or not. That has worked especially good because it's not just this project, it's not just a software, a platform, but it's a network of governments working together to improve it, to improve the processes. So it's more also that part, no? Since you share the platform, you can share also learnings, and this is why it grows so fast comparing with other platforms. But yeah, it's...
Okay, thank you.
Shall we? Yes, there's a gentleman at the back, I think.
Thank you. My question would be about the way most of these examples are framing participation as something that you decentralize and you devolve the decision making somewhere. And this often requires that the policymakers then let go of making these decisions. And Miguel mentioned that this is a massive problem. How do you then make sure that the policymakers are your allies and that they know that you are on the same side of trying to make better decisions and not just taking the decisions out of the table and putting them somewhere else?
Difficult question. That doesn't depend at all in the platform. That depends on how you design the participation process itself. So basically, it's not about digital or offline, whatever it is. Where is the decisions taken through the process? In all these processes, there are processes that can be really top down. So basically, the decision is basically taken in the institution, and then you just decide the small things. For example, the classic referendum, like the Brexit referendum, is a very top-down process. There's somebody in the institution who decides first what is the issue, what is the problem, what are the solutions, and sometimes even just giving two specific solutions. So it's not a wide range. In the opposite side, if you can have a lot of different designs on the process, you have the process that are totally bottom-up, like these citizen initiatives in Switzerland, where it's the citizens who first decide the issue by collecting signatures and proposing solutions. So this is the first phase, deciding what we want to talk about. And then people can vote on the solutions, and then the institution can also propose an alternative to the solution. So, for example, in the case of Switzerland, when one of these initiatives goes to the referendum stage, the government can also propose the alternative. So you can vote the people proposal, nothing, or the government. So in that sense, it's much more easy to produce things that are connected to both sides, because the government has they say, but they are not controlling everything, so really the people can propose the priorities, and usually this is the best design. So, but again, it's the same problem. The designs are available and are very common, and it's not, you don't need to reinvent much about that. It's just to have the politicians who is going to take the designs that give the most interesting results, or not the other ones. That's why when situations like Brexit or similar referendums, after it, a lot of people are angry, are not happy, while in this other more bottom-up, usually happens the opposite. The people are participating in the process from the very beginning, and when the outcome happens, even the people who lose, for example, in Switzerland is very funny, they say they are a country of happy losers. Because when the people lose a referendum, they're happy with it. They say, well, okay, but the people talk about it, it was in the agenda, people thought with enough time, and then, okay, they decided maybe that was not the time for my proposal, but they don't get angry with that. While in other places, or when thinking about elections and so on, it says that it's more like angry winners. No? So maybe Trump won and your party won, but it's like more an angry feeling. So yeah.
Okay, time for one more question, I think. The lady over there.
Hi, thank you. That was really, really interesting. I guess I'm wondering about how you moderate the comments on Consul. So particularly if there are like controversial issues and you want it to be an inclusive space, if you have debates around things that might of their nature be off-putting to certain minority groups, for example, how do you manage to make that not shut down debate but also be diverse and inclusive?
Since Since these are institutional platforms, usually the institution have people who moderate, so civil servants who check that these things don't happen. But in general, for example, in this specific platform, you basically don't need to moderate at all, because since all the comments, all the proposals, all the ideas, just the users can vote, like I like or I dislike this idea. When something is not appropriate or well said, very fast go to the bottom of the list. So you have thousands and thousands of proposals, and at the very bottom you have the ones that are maybe not so appropriate, basically have no impact in the whole dynamics of the platform. So it's self-moderation. So it's the own society who moderate which opinions, comments, ideas should go up and have more visibility, and which ones should go down.
Okay. Yeah, one more question then.
Thanks for your presentations. I've got a question for Yolan. Is there a mechanism by which you can calculate the error rate within the predictions, for example, Brexit or the US election? Because
yeah, so I think I presented this figure, right? The kind of a prediction accuracy and also F measure of the model. So what we did is, obviously, because there's no gold standard label on this Twitter data, especially if we want to do this stance dynamics prediction, then we actually need to for example, based on the past few days tweets, right? We predict what's the user's stance in the next time period. So what we did here is we collected a large amount of, I think, over a few million tweets. Relating, during that period, so relating to either Brexit or relating to U.S. general election. What we did is we used these users kind of a hashtags, because there's sometimes user put the hashtag vote Trump or vote Hillary, right? So we can use those hashtags as a proxy stance label of that particular tweet. So in that way, we actually have some kind of noisy labels. So once we have these noisy labels, then we can still train a machine learning model to do this stance classification. So we use that kind of stance label as kind of proxy labels for the evaluation of our proposed model.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to make one comment, if I may, something perhaps could chew over in the break that's coming up. We all know that influencers are now a key element of social media. I wonder if we might see the rise of influencers on public participation platforms, and maybe that might be an interesting intermediation between grassroots, bottom up and top down. Okay, so we have a break now for refreshments. If you could be back here for 3:15, that would be great. And when we return, we have a presentation from the Netherlands. Neftis Brandsma from Groningen is going to talk about citizen participation in the Netherlands. So to conclude, I'd just like to thank our panel members again. Thank you.